a representative, which is the union, receives, it must outline the name of the worker, the classification of the worker, the job description, the wage that they receive, and the criteria that was utilized. What metric was utilized to deem them redundant to the organization? All of that has to be outlined within that document, that notification of retrenchment. And when you go further down into that, when I spoke about sections 14 to 17, that speaks that even though you are served the notification of retrenchment, the employers must still maintain the terms and conditions until the termination date as if you were never served.
Wow.
So you cannot be treated in a prejudicial nature to say, okay, out of my place. Because that is immediately an IRO, that's an industrial relations offense. And that can be filed in court.
In the case where workers are not unionized, is it that this legislation or the RSVP still stands?
Of course. The law encourages that even if you're an individual worker or contract worker, that if you believe that you are grieved or there's some trade dispute, a potential trade dispute, or IRO, an industrial relations offense, that one should get in contact with a trade union or a labor lawyer if one desires. The industrial relations court, it's a working class court. It has similar powers to the high court, so a lot of employers believe that it's just this little punitive legal entity, but it has similar powers to the high court. So what happens there, usually when one tries to appeal it, they aren't very successful because it has similar powers to the high court. So one can get redress and justice once they make contact with a union or a lawyer that is a quarrel with labor law, because not every lawyer may be a quarrel with labor law in a concentrated and specific manner. So you get in contact with a labor relations officer in a trade union or a labor lawyer, and they would be able to represent said worker or workers in the industrial court.
Very well. One final question before we go to a break to move on this evening. In the event that, based on your explanations, if one or more of those principles or processes have not been observed in the process of terminating or deeming redundant, or even with respect to severance, what course of action is normally taken?
So, very good question. So we're going to jump a little into the IRA, the Industrial Relations Act, and which is Chapter 8801. And Chapter 8801, Section 40, clearly encourages the employer and employee, or the employee representative, to meet and treat in good faith. Whether it's private, whether it's the state, you are to meet and treat in good faith. And failure to do so, based upon the nature and severity of dismissal or termination, if it is that discrimination or some form of prejudicial action is believed to be taken, one can immediately file an industrial relations offense or trade dispute in the court. That can be pursued, because that is the place where justice can be served. And in this very dynamic environment, there's a lot of changes based upon digital transformation and automation and the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. And some organizations believe that that can be utilized to eliminate the human component. But really and truly, it is to assist and enhance the capability and the capacity of the human component. There are a lot of organizations, one that I'm quite familiar with, right now, that is feeling the effects of trying to eliminate the human component. So automation and these other components of restructuring, that is why I said it's a very complex process that has a multiplicity of different tiers and levels that you would utilize to see the feasibility to inform, not to manipulate, to inform your manpower planning and the rationalization to making the organization, as we would have mentioned before, whether it be a cost center, a profit center, whether it be the state, private or corporate, to make the organization more effective and more efficient in the best interest of the masses.
Wow, wow, wow. That is a lot of information, a lot of accurate information, and I want to really thank you this evening for coming on the program to share with us. We've had a lot of eye-openers. There are things that you would have spoken to that really hit me, because when you match it against a lot of what we're seeing now taking place, and we're going to be dealing with that in the next segment this evening, it speaks volumes to where we should be going. So, Kevin, I want to thank you this evening for joining us.
Much obliged, Mr.
Really,
David.
really appreciate it. And I mean, I trust that at some point in time in the very near future, we can have you again as a guest on the program.
It is always a pleasure to be on Tobago's #1 information platform and in the presence of the Minority Report as well. Trust me.
Thank you very much for such a warm and Kevin. Just continue joining us this evening. You can continue to share the live. We're going to be going to a break, and when we get back, we're going to have the minority leader in studio with us, and we're going to continue our discussions. Just stay logged on, stay locked on, and continue to share the live, share the live, share the live. We'll be back soon.
I'm Patricia Nicholson-Richards to our
Welcome
top
to Tobago
story.
Update Sports. I'm your boy Marcus Daniel. Thank you.
Trinidad and looms as
remains. When
the public is
nobody lives here. Oil and gas exploration continues to affect the livelihood.
Spearside's marine
in
industry.
Tobago fishermen.
When will the
Sion
Roxborough
Francis
Hospital be fully functional?
Of the 5 a.m. to 12 p.m. window
Still
at the
find
islands,
treasures like the golden
continue to
waterfall.
rise in Tobago.
Good morning. Put a smile on
The Street 919 FM and the Tobago Updates presents the Tobago Updates Morning Show live simulcast on the Street 919 FM. Start your day with all the information you want and need with the simulcast of the Tobago Updates Morning Show live Mondays to Fridays from 7 a.m. on the Street 919 FM, the official station that defends the nation.
Welcome back this evening to the Minority Report. We had a very interesting segment there with Mr. Kevin Phillips, and I mean the information was indeed invaluable. That's information that you can't pay for, and we want to continue this evening into the other segment, the other half of this evening's program as we continue the discussion. But before we actually do so, I also want to, in my congratulations, congratulate the TPAC, who are doing Tobago totally proud in the sister isle of Trinidad, and are playing to sold out audiences. And I mean, what we're seeing here, I think that definitely what should be a discussion on the table is taking this bitter cassava production regional and possibly international. I think it's something that should definitely be considered. This evening, as we're back, joining me is the man of the moment, as we call him, the minority leader, Assemblyman Kelvon Morris. Kelvon, welcome to Minority Report.
Thank you, Mr. David. Let me say good evening to all of Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and everyone locked on and viewing us live on Tobago Updates this evening.
Nice. It's truly a pleasure always having you, and we know that as we continue with this show, The Minority Report, it's not just going to be educational, but it's definitely going to put a lot of persons in a place of being able to make more informed decisions. This evening, as I know you would have been following, we had a very, very in-depth interview where we discussed the issue of some industrial relations matters, and we know that that has been sort of a whirlwind topic on the island. And you know, before we actually get into what our conversation is going to be, we want to be able to take a look at a couple clips that we have loaded before we go
further. I just really want to compliment your guest you had on the show, Mr. Phillips. I found the information to be quite informative and useful going forward, you know. So I'm hoping that, and Mr. Phillips is also a former classmate of mine. We sat right next to each other, so you know, it's really a proud moment when you see persons like Mr. Phillips and how they would have developed over time.
True, very, very true. Indeed, when you get a compliment like that, then you know you're cooking with gas, as they say. So I'm going to go right now to the producer, and let's run the first clip.
When we come into office, we will have to increase those jobs. We believe so. We in the PDP, we believe that when we enter into office, we may have to increase the amount of CPEP workers, the amount of URP workers, the amount of development workers. We hold that belief really. Because one thing our Chief Secretary Farley Chavez Augustine sets out to do is to end unemployment. We must end it. There must be zero unemployment in this country. Zero. As our first business is to return Tobago to full employment.
Yes, well, you heard it first or second on Tobago Updates tonight. The ending of unemployment and increasing jobs in CPEP and URP. Let's go to the second clip, Mr. Producer.
Line number one they have told you is that you will lose services when you vote for the PDP. You have no service to lose when when you vote for the PDP. In fact, the PDP is about providing service more than anybody else, to the point that they also accuses us of wanting to spend out money on you, give away money to you, promoting laziness. They try to accuse us of that. But you will not lose any services. You will not lose your jobs. You will not lose your food cards. Nobody coming to take back a hamper from you that they give you. Nobody coming to take away a contract that you're already doing. Because we have been saying from this platform, this is about Tobago.
Yes, so we just heard it again from the now Chief Secretary. And I like to hear, as we say, from the horse's mouth, so that it can more adequately inform the discussions that we have going forward. So, Mr. Minority Leader, we have just heard two clips where we saw the political leader of the PDP, Assemblyman Watson Duke, and the now Chief Secretary, Assemblyman Farley Augustine, make certain utterances on the campaign trail. And they were very clear and concise in their declarations to the people of Tobago. However, what we have seen from January to now seems to bear a different picture. I want you to take us from this point and carry us in what is your perception of what is taking place, and coming out of the previous interview, how do you see what the direction that we're going in, if it's going to benefit the island, the people of this island? Just share your thoughts on it.
Well, firstly, Mr. David, what is clear is that these are not Kelvon's words, these are not somebody making these things up. As you would have seen from the clip, the Chief Secretary, well, the Deputy Political Leader of the PDP, as well as the Political Leader of the PDP, and Mr. Augustine, who is now the Chief Secretary, would have given clear assurances to the people of Tobago, all the people of Tobago, that one, no one would lose service, no one would lose their jobs, and no one would lose whatever benefits they had prior to the elections. Fast forward to June, and what we have seen is a number of restructuring and termination of contracts of persons. We have seen non-renewal of contracts, persons who have legitimate expectations to renewal, persons who would have worked within the THA, expanding 10, sometimes 20 years, having their contracts terminated. And what we are also seeing, based on what Mr. Phillips would have explained, is that there's no due process. They are not following proper industrial relations process. In fact, in many cases, you will recognize they are breaching the law, and that in itself has consequences to the point that we, the taxpayers of Tobago, will now have to, once these people approach the courts for redress, we are the ones that would have to foot this bill for the very irresponsible actions of this current administration and for the very victimizing actions of this administration, because you will also remember Mr. Duke promised that there will be no justice for persons with big red flags, but we are saying that these persons, you don't even know if they have big red flags, and they're really Tobagonians first. And to see these kind of actions, these kind of, this real spiteful and wicked, dastardly kind of approach to treating with persons' employment, it is rather unfortunate.
Now, we looked at in the previous interview, and you touched on it a bit in terms of the term process.
Yes.
And based on what Mr. Phillips was explaining to us, that process is connected to things such as manpower audits and doing assessments of the organization, and all should be geared towards ensuring that after this step is taken, that the organization must function effectively. Tell me if you have seen that system being employed.
So that is it, and that is something we have been calling for. We have said the process should have really been, as a new administration, yes, you would want to do things differently. In some instances, you would have to do things differently. And we are saying that what should have really taken place is for you to really do a proper audit of what you require, what you don't require. And Mr. Phillips spoke to it. Then you might recognize there are surplus in some instances. There will be instances where you can redeploy, where you can retool, you can retrain. And then there would be some persons who you might have to just really call in and provide some proper level of severance so that these persons can also move on with their lives. In one instance, I was privy to a couple of the letters, and the division is saying to the workers in the unit, we are now reviewing, right? They are now reviewing the operations of the unit. But in the very same letter that they are now reviewing, they also determined that they are restructuring. So you understand how crazy a situation. So you are in the process of now trying to review and look at how you can make the organization, the unit, more efficient. But you have also determined that you are going to restructure and terminate with 1 month notice. And Mr. Phillips talked about the 45 days notice.
So even that is in breach.
So even the timelines are in breach. So it is rather unfortunate. And you know what is really of concern to me is that we have an HR department, we have the administrator. So I'm wondering if these persons are actually engaging the services of IR consultants who can really advise them as to the proper process. Because as I'm saying, I'm more concerned as to the cost to the taxpayer. This this is unnecessary cost that could have been used to develop our healthcare sector, to help our youths, could have employed more people, because what you're now doing, when you send home over 100 people, you now have to compensate these people. These are people who could have been productive in the organization all this while. You know, so it comes like you're now going to pay them a lump sum, but you still have to engage persons to do the work. So we're already paying the money twice, because you have to pay people, and then you still have to pay these people that you sent home.
Now, I want you to just give us an explanation that you would have touched on last show when you spoke to and you made reference to the restructuring that took place at TADCO. So bring us to the light with that.
So, and this, what I would have done is shown an example as to the proper process as opposed to the improper process. And in that situation, you would have seen, and Mr. Phillips really provided a really good platform as to show us what are the process and what are the options. And as he rightfully said, retrenchment is really the end. After all the final stage, after all the other options. And in the situation with TADCO, because they wanted to create an environment where, you know, we are in a pandemic one, and you really don't want to disenfranchise workers, they would have ensured, as much as they would have merged the company, they would have provided opportunities for persons within the company, and where there was surplus, they would have redeployed that surplus into the actual Tobago House of Assembly. So no one lost their job, nor was their circumstances any less worse. So they were they were not worse off than what they were before the exercise. So it ensured that they preserved your circumstances rather than making it worse than what it was.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to read for us this evening a clause that we're seeing persons calling and reaching out to the minority with respect to some sort of assistance. This is a clause that is being put into persons receiving new contracts, whether it's 1 year or 3 years, and there are many persons that we're seeing receiving 1-year contracts, even though the now Chief Secretary would have made that a pillar of his conversation on the campaign trail to campaign against those types of contracts. But in one of the clauses, I'm going to read verbatim here, the administrator or head of department may terminate the employment of the person engaged at any time after 3 months from the date of commencement of this contract for cause other than breach of contract and misconduct, including poor performance as reflected in the performance appraisal report, or in situations where the contractual positions are abolished or no longer relevant to the assembly by the provision in the persons engaged of one month's notice in writing, or by the payment of 1 month's salary in lieu of notice.
So this is where the industrial courts would come in, because I would have, based on my interactions, as you would have seen, I would have, the minority has been very active in terms of getting legal advice on some of these matters. And that type of clause was brought to the attention of our legal counsel. And what I was advised is that once there's something in law where if the clause is seen to be sort of egregious in terms of nature, then the court itself would strike down that clause, because if it really is such that it's so disadvantageous to one party, then the court tends to overlook the clause. So, and this is one area where in an industrial relations type court, where the interest of the worker is always considered, you know, it would be very difficult for the assembly to prove that such a clause, you know, really holds any water, because what you're saying is that I've given you a 3-year contract, but at any point in time, Just if I just decide I just want to, I don't like you, I just want to victimize you, I just want to get rid of you, I can just come in the morning with 1 month's notice and tell you, so you have to leave. And I don't think, based on the advice I've gotten, that clause perhaps may not be able to stand scrutiny in the industrial court.
And I think based on everything that we would have heard in the prior segment explained by Mr. Phillips, who went quite in depth and quoted chapter and verse, I think that clause definitely is something that needs to be removed and so on. But we see this being proliferated presently.
And you have to also remember as well, so in the THA itself, in some instances, persons don't really reach a point of a signed contract where they have those kind of clauses. So you have situations, because sometimes I've worked in the THA for quite some time, and you only sometimes see your contract at the very end when you're trying to get your contract gratuity. So in some instances, even where it exists, it will be difficult for them to really prove and convince the court that such a practice is fair. And in other instances, they may not have that clause to really hold on to. So,
wow. This is Tobago Updates, and we are on the Minority Report. We're chatting here with the Minority Leader.
There was one incident, I don't know if you have that, but a document came to me this week with a worker, and it was really concerning. It was of, I was almost flabbergasted, and I wanted to, wanted to understand if, the processes of the assembly, if things has changed over since December 6th. Because I saw an employee who was basically terminated by a contracted officer, not the administrator, not the HRO too, who are all public servants, but by someone who is contracted and is a program coordinator of a unit.
Let me assist you with that in terms of reading that very document.
I'm still shocked.
I'm going to read the document so that the
I want to know who administrator would approve such a procedure and such a process.
And the notice is non-extension of month-to-month contract. However, this individual was not on a month-to-month contract. They actually had been working within the THA for over 20 years.
So Tobago, I know sometimes you all may feel like, as a minority, we are overstretching, we continue, we are exaggerating at times, and you might feel, but it is really disheartening when you're seeing the kind of breaches that is happening just because you believe that you really want to victimize someone. That you have, in this instance, the program coordinator.
Program director.
The program director. And I would want to ask tonight, how did this person get this job? Because this is another thing we are seeing in Tobago at this time, and they complained against it before. They were telling Tobagonians that kind of engagement is wrong. Person just ending up in a position is wrong, and I believe it is wrong as well. And I'm saying tonight that if it was wrong then, how could it be right now that you are engaging persons without any due process? The positions aren't advertised. Tobagonians who are well qualified aren't getting an opportunity to at least apply for the positions. So here comes a program, what is the name? Program director. And this program director is now directing a staff member without authority from the administrator, without authority from the HR, to tell the worker you are not to return to work. When did we get like this? When did we get to this place?
And what is unfortunate is that the letter quotes as per Executive Council Minute number 117, and they gave the date. Please be advised that your month-to-month which does not exist, engagement in the position, and it was laid out, under the program ends on the 31st of May. Now, and the letter came almost on the 31st of May.
So
and it was signed by the program director.
So when this person goes to court, should we not as Tobagonians also send the judgment to this program director and ensure that this program director pays the money from his or her pocket? Because this is a clear breach that somebody without the requisite authority decided to take on responsibility and authority that they clearly don't have.
Clearly. And this is what the Minority Report is about.
So I would be writing to the administrator of that division on behalf of the people of Tobago to have this matter investigated. And if that program director, it is found, would have taken on a responsibility that they do not possess, I will be asking the administrator to take the necessary corrective and disciplinary action against that individual, because what that individual is in fact doing is bringing the entire Tobago House of Assembly into disrepute.
Yes. And folks, you're listening to the Minority Report, and you're hearing strong words coming from a strong minority leader who, as would have been indicated in the first leg of this program, not only would argue or oppose, but also advocate on behalf of Tobagonians and many of us who do not have the voice in the particular forum. We're going to go to a break, and when we get back, we're going to be looking a bit at what takes place in the House and examining carefully probably one or two of the questions that would have been asked in the last sitting. Continue to share the live. We still have some time, and we look forward to joining back with you in a minute or so.
The Street 919 FM and the Tobago Updates presents the Tobago Updates Morning Show live simulcast on the Street 919 FM. Start your day with all the information you want and need with the simulcast of the Tobago Updates Morning Show live Mondays to Fridays from 7 a.m. on the Street 919 FM, the official station that defends the nation.
Welcome back to the Minority Report on Tobago Updates. Let me encourage you, for those of you who are viewing, you can send your comments and questions on the Facebook page, on the live, if you're viewing it on YouTube or on the Tobago Updates website. This evening we're going to continue our discussions, and we're going to head in a direction that is a little off of where we were going. Minority Leader, many persons know that the assemblymen and so on meet from time to time in the House, but not very many people actually understand what is the role. To some persons, they just think, well, they don't have any work to do, they just meet once a month, you know. So we want to be able to highlight some of what is done in the House, and specifically with respect to questions there were some questions that you and the minority councillor would have asked, and I see you smiling because you know some of the licks that you may have gotten for asking some questions. But there are questions that you all would have asked, and we want to begin to be able to examine those questions, and at least so the general public can understand what are some of the things that you all advocate for. And so we're going to go firstly to a question that was asked to Dr. Faith B. Israel, and I'll ask the producer to play a clip of what she would have stated at Mandate Monday.
As of the 1st of April, we currently have outpatient services happening at the hospital, and that includes urology, renal clinics, OBGYN, peds, and internal medicine. As a matter of fact, if you are part of those clinics in the Scarborough General Hospital and you live in the eastern end of the island, you should get a call stating that you can come to Roxborough to have those services available. The same applies to dialysis. We have the capacity to do at least have 6 seats used at the same time. So that will also be available. That is also available. Again, if you are one of those individuals who are dialyzed at the Bacolet Health Center, expect a call, and you live on the eastern end of the island, expect a call to start having those services available at the Roxborough Hospital.
Very well. So that was what the Secretary would have stated at Mandate Monday. Now, you all would have asked a question, and I'll ask the producer to put the question up as well on screen as I read the question out. As of the 1st of April, we currently have outpatient services happening at the hospital, and that includes urology, renal clinics, OBGYN, peds, and internal medicine. Can the Secretary indicate the number of patients, and this is where the question begins, can the Secretary indicate the number of patients accessing these specific or specified services from April 1st to present at the Roxborough Hospital, and can that breakdown be provided for the period of April 1st to May 16th specifically? We're going to just go to the clip of that response, Mr. Producer.
7 new patients who were seen via the gynecological clinic, OBGYN. We had 2 new general medicine patients. For May, we had 39 OBGYN and 16 medicine. Thank you.
Minority Leader.
With respect to renal, urology, and the other services that weren't mentioned, is it that, do you have the figures for those?
The figures that I have provided are the figures available.
What's that?
Secretary?
The figures that I provided are the figures that are available.
Is it that persons went to access those services and were unable to access those services?
Secretary?
The process that is used to admit new patients into the outpatient clinic at the Roxborough Health Facility is one that is based on referrals either from the health centers in the district or from individuals who live in the area who currently attend clinics in the Scarborough district. Every person who has been referred to the Roxborough Health Facility thus far has been seen by the professionals in their respective fields.
Well then, Minority Leader, I want you to summarize what just took place there for us.
That is where you call in good Tobago parlance, the cocoa dance. So you would recognize we ask specific questions based on their own words, because it was the Secretary of Health who did inform us on Monday that all these fantastic services are now available to the people of the East. And we would have had information coming to us that most of the services that she would have announced weren't available. Persons who had valid clinic appointments and so on would have gone to the Roxborough Health Facility Hospital and recognized that the services weren't available, because the truth and fact is that for some of those very services, they just don't have the persons engaged, so they don't have the clinicians engaged at this time. So really and truly, the Secretary would have misled us on Monday by trying to present a reality that just does not exist. And you know why she tried to present that reality? Because she had the loudest voice criticizing and pretending like she had all the answers when it comes to the health sector, only to find out that there are many challenges that, that what she thought was a quick fix that takes some time. So I'm not overly critical, but I just wanted her to understand that the very things you were criticizing, you're finding challenges treating with as well. And you should be able to admit it, rather than try to beat around the bush and carry us and try to play the blame game as she did, trying to answer the question.
As you said, doing the cocoa dance.
Yeah, the cocoa dance.
We want to move on to another question that was posed in the House, and this time to Mr. Trevor James, the Secretary of the Division of what we call Works. And I'll read that particular question out for the benefit of our listeners and our viewers. The question about board function as it relates to the Studley Park Enterprise Limited Board of Directors. Can the Secretary please indicate if there is a difference in the roles, functions, and remuneration of the independent directors appointed to the board as opposed to the executive directors appointed to the board? And I'll ask the producer to play Mr. James's response for us.
Suppose that I have failed, because it could not be that the member was asking what seems to me to be a rhetorical question. He represents an organization that has tremendous experience in setting up boards and understanding what the roles and functions of board members are, to come to this House today to ask this question. So I had intended to give a long forward, Madam Presiding Officer, but I've decided to answer the question as it is written. If there's a difference in the roles, absolutely there is a difference in the roles. If there's a difference in the functions, absolutely there's a difference in the functions. And absolutely there's a difference in the remuneration of all independent directors and of the executive directors appointed to the board at Studley Park Quarry.
Nice. So, Minority Leader, having gotten that response from Mr. James, you then asked a follow-up question. That question was this: can the Secretary please indicate what are those differences in functions, in roles and remuneration? Because we clearly heard Mr. James say that yes, there are differences.
So that is the idiocracy of the whole response, because here it is, this Secretary attempted to belittle me for asking a question that is very valid. He even went on to indicate that the People's National Movement is very experienced in terms of setting up boards, and that is true. And it is for that reason I asked the question, because in all my experience and exposure to the Tobago House of Assembly, this is the first time we will have a board set up with distinctive positions of executive director and independent director. This is the first time I've checked, even before my time, and there's no such arrangement in the THA. So we were trying to ascertain from him what is the reason for this specific distinction between the executive director and the independent directors. And because there's also some very important connotations based on what he would have responded. But you recognize, while he was saying that it was so obvious, the distinction and the differences, when I asked the follow-up question, which was simple, what are the differences? He was unable to provide.
Well, let's hear it from his own mouth. Producer, could you play the response that Mr. James would have given to the follow-up question?
I beg your leave to state that I would need to research the answers to that question, and I'll return at the next sit-in to answer that question, those questions.
So you
Minority Leader, come. Tell me what happened there.
So you understand the games that are being played, because here it is, you're saying that it's so obvious what the differences are. Yet, when asked simply, tell us what the difference is, you're the person who would have taken the note. This is the line secretary who would have created this new type of board arrangement that was unable to give an honest answer as to what really is the arrangement. But you see, there's more in the mortar than in the pestle, and he understands why we ask the question, and that is why he wants to go and do his research. But we are waiting on him. We haven't forgotten him, and as soon as the House gives us an opportunity, we'll be bringing back that question so that I can really bring to the public, bring to Tobago's attention why it's so important that the Secretary tells us the difference, because there's an important situation there. And I won't say no more on that, except to also ask, is his brother still on the board or not on the board? Because you remember that was one of the issues that we would have taken on frontally. The Chief Secretary would have indicated to us that he would have asked him to rescind his appointment. But the question is valid. Has that appointment been rescinded? And I say no more.
And you heard it this evening from the Minority Leader, and he ended by saying, and I say no more. So we look forward to this as it unfolds. We look forward to this particular situation as we continue to go through the process of examining the facts, looking at the situations, and discussing the issues. Minority Leader, I want to thank you yet again for bringing a wealth of conversation and discussion to the show this evening. And as we close, I want to give you the opportunity to bring your closing remarks for our listeners today.
Well, two things. I recall there was a question with respect to, what was the, I think someone asked about...
Okay, so let me read that particular question. What do you think about the THA employing 75% of employed Tobagonians?
Well, the reality is the THA continues to be the main source of employment, and until we can, as an island, really treat with developing our private sector, it means that we all must be prepared to embrace and support a very diverse and vibrant private sector in Tobago. And until we can do that, then the THA will continue to remain that source, because where else do we want our Tobago people to go? There's a situation called brain drain, where when you educate your population and when you don't have the opportunities here, you now, the very investment that you would have made in those persons, somebody else gets the benefit. Is it that we want other people to benefit from the wealth of talent and knowledge that we would have invested in? And so therefore my question is, my position on, yes, we know that it's quite large, but we all have to work together to build the private sector so that persons on their own volition, not through forced termination, will be able to see a future in the private sector, will see a future in entrepreneurship, and in that way we will build out a vibrant private sector for Tobago.
Very well said, well put together. And on that note of private sector, let me say good evening to members of the executive of the Tobago Chamber.
Yes.
Who I know had some discussions recently, and we're going to probably hear about those discussions in our next installment. This evening I want to thank our viewers for joining us on the Minority Report, and I want to thank Mr. Phillips and the Venerable Minority Leader who is going to close us off.
Yes, I also want to join. I want to congratulate the Tobagonian swimmers who participated in the Pan Am Championship. Excellent performances there. I believe sport is one of those vehicles we can really invest and bring out the best in our young people. Also want to shout out Mr. Elvis Rajman and the rest of the team at TPAC. And shout out the visionary leadership of the past administration for ensuring that, you know, they would have had the foresight to implement such an organization as TPAC that could really harness the rich cultural talents that we have here on island. And the bitter cassava, I heard you said you want to see it up the regions, international. I want to see it on the big screen. So that's my challenge to TPAC. Yes. We want to see some shows on the big screen, and I just want to thank you, Tobago. Thank you for everyone, Trinidad and Tobago, who would have logged on. The show will continue to educate and edify minds so that we can all have, you know, be in a more informed position going forward in treating with the issues of Tobago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minority Leader, and I want to say good night as well to the Minority Councillor, who is not here physically with us.
Petal, we miss you.
Minority Councillor, Mrs. Petal Daniel Benoit, and I trust that she will be joining us soon on the program as we continue to inform Tobago and continue to bring the issues to the forefront so that we can have meaningful discussions. Thank you very much for logging in and for viewing with us this evening. I am Marilyn David, your host, and I want to say we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 8 p.m. for the Minority Report. Have a good evening.